He hadn't even wiped the coffee from his chest before standing up, red-faced, nostrils flared, and voice thundering across the quiet cafe. "Do you even know who I am?" His words sliced through the still air like a blade. A pin-drop silence fell across the room. All eyes turned to the table in the corner, where the man in the custom-tailored black suit towered over a young black waitress, who stood her ground with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos he carried. Before we continue, if you're watching us for the first time, Elliot Stories welcomes you specially with a warm hug. This is where real stories come alive, with suspense, emotion, and truth. If you're loving this already, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Tell us the city you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to connect with you. Now, let's get back to this unforgettable moment. His name was Richard Holloway. Billionaire by blood, tycoon by trade, and by reputation. Well, let's just say feared was the polite term. He walked into every room like he owned it. People whispered his name with awe, or with dread. You couldn't tell which. That afternoon, the cafe was buzzing quietly. Small clinks of cups, a soft jazz tune humming from the ceiling, and then he walked in. The staff froze. The hostess almost dropped her iPad. Even the manager, who rarely left his office, peeked through the glass door. He didn't order. He demanded. No pleasantries, no smiles. Table by the window. Not that one, the other one, he snapped. A server rushed to clean it. Moments later, he barked at another staff member for being too slow with his espresso. The staff braced themselves. He was always like this, everywhere he went. But today was different. Her name was Amara. Just 2 weeks into the job, but you wouldn't know it. She had a kind of presence, subtle but unshakable. Grace in her step, sharpness in her eyes. She didn't smile because she had to, she smiled because she meant it. When she brought Richard his cappuccino, she noticed the scowl before the insult. "Is this foamed dishwater?" he scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You people really need proper training." Amara blinked slowly. "Sir, if there's a problem." He cut her off. "The problem is you. I don't like being served by amateurs. Especially loud ones." The cafe went still again. She gently took the cup from the table and turned to walk away, but then, he muttered it. Low enough that only she could hear it. "Typical." She stopped, turned around, and placed the cup back down. Not forcefully, but deliberately. He raised a brow. "Did I stutter?" "No," she said quietly, "but perhaps your pride did." The words hung in the air like a spark about to meet gasoline. He leaned back in mock amusement. "Excuse me." "No, you excuse me," she said, her voice firm now, but even. "You walk into places like the world owes you something. You insult strangers because you think wealth erases decency. You mistake arrogance for status." He stood abruptly, his knee hitting the edge of the table, sending coffee spilling across the white cloth. Gasps rippled through the cafe. Even the manager stepped forward from the back. "Amara," someone whispered behind her. But she didn't flinch. "I've worked here 2 weeks," she continued, "and in those 2 weeks, you've made 3 staff members cry. 1 quit. I watched you mock a girl's accent last week and no one said anything. But I will." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is brave? This is stupidity. You're finished." She smiled, and it wasn't a weak smile. It was the kind of smile you wear when you know you've already won the real battle. "I'd rather be finished with dignity," she said, "than employed under your shadow." The manager reached the scene, his face pale. "Sir, I—" "Let her speak," Richard said suddenly. Everyone stared. Amara blinked. "You want a voice," he said, slightly softer now. "Say what you came to say." She hesitated for a second, but only a second. Then she stepped forward. "You walk in here dressed in a $10,000 suit, but your words are cheaper than instant coffee. You belittle people because deep down, you're still the boy who wasn't hugged enough. You insult what you fear: connection, vulnerability, humanity." The cafe was silent again. A few mouths hung open. Even the espresso machine stopped hissing. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. He laughed. Not sarcastically. Not mockingly. But genuinely. The kind of laugh that's rare and rusty, like an old door opening for the first time in years. "You're not wrong," he said finally. Amara tilted her head, unsure how to respond. He sat back down, the coffee stain soaking into his trousers unnoticed. His shoulders dropped. "You're not wrong," he repeated, almost to himself. Nobody dared move. Not even the waitress at table 4 who'd been mid-pour. He looked up at her again. "What's your name?" "Amara." He nodded. "You've got guts, Amara." She took a deep breath. "And you've got ears. I hope you start using them." He chuckled. "Touché." Then he did something that shocked everyone even more than the confrontation. He apologized. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've been an ass," he said. "A rich, proud, spoiled ass. I'm sorry." The cafe buzzed with disbelief. The manager looked like he'd seen a ghost. The hostess covered her mouth. Amara simply nodded. Apology accepted. Then, quietly, she walked away. But Richard didn't stop watching her. Not because he was offended. Not because he was plotting revenge. But because, for the first time in years, someone had seen him. Not his money, not his image. Him. And instead of running away, she had stood. The next day, he returned. Same suit, same table. But this time, he asked for her by name. She served him quietly. No small talk. But when he left, he dropped a note with his tip. "Teach me how to be human again." And that was the beginning of something nobody saw coming. The note lay beneath the tip, folded neatly like a promise. "Teach me how to be human again." Amara stared at it for several seconds, heart knocking softly against her ribs. She wasn't sure whether to laugh, roll her eyes, or simply ignore it. So she did none of those things. She tucked it into her apron and continued with her shift. The next day, he came again. And the next. And the next after that. Always to the same table. Always requesting her. But something had changed. He never raised his voice. Never rolled his eyes. Never criticized. He sat quietly, ordered politely, and waited. On the 5th day, she finally asked, "Why are you here?" Richard set down his cup, meeting her eyes. "I meant what I wrote." She smirked. "I'm a waitress, not a therapist." "You're not just a waitress," he said gently. "You're the first person in years who spoke to me like I was human, and made me realize I haven't been one." She studied him for a moment. He wasn't just saying the words. He meant them. But Amara had spent her whole life reading between the lines of men like him. Power had a way of pretending to be repentance. Still, something about his tone made her pause. "All right," she said. "Let's start with a smile." He looked confused. "A smile?" "Yes. The kind that doesn't come from sarcasm or social obligation. The kind that starts in your chest." He tried. It was terrible. She laughed, and it was the first real laugh he'd heard in years. From that day, it became a rhythm. Not dates. Not yet. But moments. After every shift, she'd sit with him for 10 minutes. They didn't talk about stocks or scandals. They talked about real things. Her childhood in Georgia. His lonely upbringing in cold boarding schools. Her love for Nina Simone. His fear of failure, despite all his wealth. One evening, she asked, "Do you even like being rich?" He looked out the window. "It's like swimming in the ocean with no land in sight. You think you're free, but you're really just lost." Amara blinked. That wasn't a metaphor she expected. Weeks passed, and slowly, people noticed the change. The regulars started nodding at him. Staff no longer avoided his table. One of the waiters even joked with him. Richard Holloway, once the monster of the cafe, was becoming a man again. Then one Friday, something happened that twisted the story once more. Amara didn't show up. Not that day. Not the next. The manager told him she'd taken a leave. Said she had a personal situation. Richard's chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much he'd come to depend on those 10 minutes each day. Her voice had become the only sound that didn't echo off his walls. He sent flowers. No reply. Sent a driver with a handwritten letter. It was returned. For the first time in decades, Richard felt helpless. So he did something nobody expected. He went to her. Found her tiny apartment on the east side. Knocked. Waited. Amara opened the door slowly, visibly surprised. She looked tired. Her eyes were puffy. "Richard, what are you doing here? You disappeared." "My mother passed," she said, voice flat. "I didn't want anyone around." Richard's mouth parted. He stepped back. I'm sorry. She nodded and began to close the door. But he gently placed his foot in the frame. Can I help? Amara's eyes flickered, searching his face for any trace of pity, performance, or ego. There was none. She stepped aside. They sat on her small couch, drinking tea in silence. She didn't talk, and he didn't fill the silence. That, in itself, was the greatest comfort. Before leaving, he placed something on her table, a photo of a cabin in the mountains. What's this? She asked. It's peace, he said. Mine. And I want to share it with you. When you're ready. A month later, she took him up on it. That cabin in the mountains became their sanctuary. Not romantic at first. Just human. They cooked, took walks, sat in silence by the fireplace. And slowly, something bloomed, not out of lust or need, but from respect. From honesty. From the courage to see one another. The man who once mocked baristas now learned to grind his own beans. The woman who once feared the arrogance of power now laughed freely in its arms. They never announced anything. They didn't need to. People at the cafe just knew when they walked in one day holding hands, gentle, not loud. Someone whispered, "Is that Amara and Richard?" The staff didn't whisper. They clapped. But this story isn't about a rich man falling in love with a waitress. It's about something deeper. It's about how courage can wake the conscience of the powerful. About how truth, when spoken without fear, can soften stone hearts. It's about Amara, the girl who didn't flinch, who didn't bend, and who taught a billionaire how to smile like a man again. She didn't just change him. She reminded everyone watching that character will always outshine currency. And the moral of the story? Never let anyone's title silence your truth. Never let their wealth shrink your worth. Sometimes, the loudest impact is made by the quietest courage. Speech balloon, what would you have done in Amara's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Red heart hash if this story touched you, please like, comment, and share with someone who needs this reminder. Bell hash and don't forget to subscribe to Elliot Stories for more real, raw, and riveting human tales. Tell us your city. We love hearing from our global family. And finally, wherever life takes you today, may you find the courage to stand, the wisdom to speak, and the peace to know your worth. This is Elliot Stories, where truth meets storytelling.